Welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss Dynasty strategy, rankings, and all things NFL. So get ready to geek out on fantasy football with your host, Rich Dotson.
Today we have a very, very special episode of the Dynasty Nerd Show here, and we have the great Matt Harmon here, the wide receiver guru himself, to join Rich and I today. Matt, how are you doing?
Oh, you're too kind, and I really appreciate you guys having me. And it's interesting because we were joking about it before we got started. Like I kind of haven't talked just rookies in a minute, so got to get back into the rookie mode. And it's funny because I love the pre-draft analysis. You know, it's great to talk about these guys hypothetically, skill sets, where they might fit, et cetera, et cetera. Just looking at them as players in isolation. But I really love the post-draft analysis more, where we know hey, this is the type of team that this guy's landed with. This is the role they might be playing, and especially this deep into the offseason calendar, we kind of already have some clues about how these guys might be deployed, where they might slot into the depth charts and things of that nature. So I'm very excited to break this down with you guys today.
Awesome. Of course, we have Rich Dotson, as I mentioned earlier. Rich, how you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm doing well. Excited to talk with Matt here. You know, the wide receiver savant, not just with fantasy football, just as NFL players overall, right? Nobody knows receivers better. And this is a class that I've been really disappointed in overall from a fantasy football standpoint. So I'm excited to dive in, hear Matt's takes as well. And I love what you said, Matt, post draft, because you can love a player as much as you possibly can on tape, but scheme matters, quarterback play matters, all of that does tie in. Draft capital, unfortunately, historically matters when it comes to production. So I'm excited to dive in here, talk about some of these receivers. I consider it a top heavy class. So excited to see how it kind of all plays out.
Yeah, and let's get into that, because last year, and honestly for several years in a row, we've been blessed with some incredible classes. And I think what Rich says here is probably the overall sentiment of a lot of different people, where a little bit of a disappointing class. Matt, do you feel that way as well in your study and your analysis? Is this a little bit of a tick down at wide receiver compared to maybe some of the other years that we've had recently?
Well, I think it kind of depends on how you view it. And I think Rich made a good point about there's a difference between doing NFL analysis and fantasy analysis. Because I think there's a lot of players in this class that are going to be good NFL players. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go out there and put up 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns every single season. We might be looking at a good group of players that are nice wide receiver 3s or maybe wide receiver 2s in an NFL offense that make the whole unit better, but might not necessarily be players that we're starting every single week from a fantasy perspective. I mean, and we are certainly blessed coming off of last year's class that was considered a very, very good wide receiver class and gave us, 3 top 12 producers right away. Maybe not the guys that we expected to be top 12 producers right away. And Malik Neighbors obviously was one of the first 2 drafted. Everybody expected that, but Brian Thomas Jr. was an immediate hit. Ladd McConkey, in my opinion, was the best of the 3 on film last year. That doesn't mean he's going to be the best forever, but last year right away, he was the best wide receiver on film between those 3 guys. And he was a second round pick. There were several guys drafted ahead of him. So a lot of that comes down to circumstances, ecosystem, and also individual player talent. I'm not sure that we're going to get those same talents necessarily in this group of rookie wide receivers, but I do think there is a lot of very interesting players that also ended up in some pretty key spots that, by the way, might not to just jump ahead into it, but when we talk about the Texans wide receivers, I think that while those guys, we'll see if they end up being big time producers in their own rights, they might actually unlock Nico Collins in a very interesting way, who we all obviously care about from a fantasy perspective. So this conversation, we're going to talk about the individual players, but how they impact the ecosystem that they arrive in might have a trickle down effect as well.
Yeah, we were blessed with these, and not just last year, these last couple of years have been a really strong influx of rookie receivers. And you mentioned guys like that, and the guys who haven't even produced yet. Ladd McConkey was one of my favorite wide receivers coming into the league last year. Probably had the most shares. But you're right. When I scout, I'm different than anybody else, because when I'm watching tape, which is what we do all off season, and then give our analysis. And I look at it from a fantasy football perspective only. Who's going to score the most points for the longest amount of time in Dynasty? And and that's my biggest, I think that's the biggest, I agree with you, Matt, where this class has a lot of players that can play in the NFL, a lot of talent there. But like you mentioned wide receiver threes, and from a fantasy perspective, that doesn't cut it for me, right? Because like, what's our goal for playing fantasy or any kind of format? It's to win. And the more people that score points, the better. And with the influx of so much talent, especially after last year's all-time class, it's easy to start when you get rookie focused to like, okay, I have Travis Hunter 1, Tet McMillan 2, Emeka 3, Jaden Higgins 4. It's easy to stack those players. Like, where do you have Luther Burden, Jack Bech? But I always look at it from a different viewpoint as well. It's like, okay, these are rookies. Now, once they get in the NFL, where do they stack against these other receivers? Because I can think of 16 receivers right now that are all under the age of 27 years old that this top class has to try and find their way into. And the only guy I could for sure that I see that could reach that star potential is Travis Hunter. Like, he's the guy that I see, like, with his twitch, his explosiveness, his jump ball skills, like, oh, maybe he can kind of entertain that Malik Neighbors neighborhood, that Justin Jefferson neighborhood from a fantasy football standpoint, even though he's got another stud right across from him in Brian Thomas. But we've seen that historically over the last 10 years where we've seen multiple wide receiver ones on a single team. So it doesn't worry me. But once you get past those guys that are at the top of the list, and what I'm really interested in talking about is how do these guys enter the overall rank set, right? Like, who's jumping, Jerry Jeudy, who's not even in the top 15 in some people's receivers, who was a wide receiver 1 last year. Like, who's better than that from a fantasy football perspective? And that's where I kind of lose interest in this class, because I don't see a lot of opportunity, and there's always going to be surprises, right? We're always going to find these guys that can kind of break the mold and step up, and maybe it's whether it be injury or the scheme they're playing in, like maybe potentially like a Deontay Thornton who can jump a Jack Bech who everybody loves. Like, that's where it gets hard for me with this class is I see so much other talent outside that's already playing the NFL that I'm excited about, that's still young and offers a lot of value to our teams.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Rich. And it does get difficult when you start putting these players into the overall rank set, because we even though it might be the 4th or 5th receiver off our board in a rookie draft, 4th or 5th receiver could be wide receiver 24 overall. It could be wide receiver 50 overall. That's where you have to start like trying to put all these together. So for you, Matt, when you're kind of digging into this class, let's talk about the top 2 guys, and then the sort of third guy. Some people have Emeka Egbuka up there with Tet and with Travis Hunter. Some have him kind of down with Jaden Higgins and Luther Burden and some of those guys. How do you see those 3 guys, and where does Emeka Egbuka fit in that mix?
Well, I agree with what Rich said, that to me, when I looked at this class pre-draft, there was only one, what I would say is a tier 1 prospect, like a guy who could go in the top 10 of any draft, not this draft, because obviously McMillan went in the top 10 of this year's draft, but it's kind of like a weaker overall class, not just at the receiver position, but just generally, especially from a skill position standpoint. There wasn't a ton of dudes that went in the first, like, it wasn't like last year's class where it was just like, offense. Yeah, right. It wasn't one of those type of classes. Really, 1 first round, 2 first round quarterbacks, but 1 like consensus first round quarterback in Cam Ward, who went first overall. That guy was Travis Hunter to me. And obviously, he's a guy who might not even play receiver, full time in the NFL. He's gonna play both ways. Like, there's no question about that. We, from a fantasy perspective, are just kind of shooting blind here about how many snaps he's actually going to play, maybe not even just over the course of the season, but game to game. And I think that it's a learning experience for the Jaguars. Like, I think people approach fantasy too much in this lens, but certainly are approaching this situation as if there's like some predetermined like outcome that they got to guess right. Like Jacksonville, I'm telling you this, like Jacksonville does not know what they're going to do with him from a full-time allocation of snaps perspective. So like we might get to week 5 and he's just getting crushed at cornerback. And like, well, we got to bail on this. Like we got to maybe play him at corner, 15% of the snaps, like only in certain packages. Or, hey, like they're trying to win games and, De'Ami Brown is giving him some good reps. Like I might got to dial it back a little bit while he learns to play receiver at the NFL level. So like all these are possible. But when I just look at Travis Hunter as a receiver talent, he really does have everything you're looking for. He's an elite separator. He's not an elite route runner just yet because there's some like nuances that he needs to learn. But from just like a movement perspective, he does move within his routes off the line of scrimmage a lot like prime Odell Beckham to me. He's got elite ball skills, great tracking, great hands at the catch point. He also was really difficult to bring down on first contact at the college level. So, man, like it is really interesting to consider long-term if Travis Hunter is like a full-time receiver, how does the relationship and the dynamic work between him and Brian Thomas Jr., who had an awesome rookie season and is an awesome player and is not just a guy that should be tethered at the outside X position. We saw that in his rookie season and averaged over 10 yards per target on screen passes, and now is playing for one of the play callers in the NFL that was one of the best at dialing up screens last year. So I do think Hunter, if he plays full-time wide receiver, I think is the clear-cut best guy in this class. But I do think from a dynasty perspective, like I think it's pretty close between him and McMillan. Like I have them in the same tier of my dynasty rankings just because Tetairoa McMillan is walking into a day one X receiver job that's vacated there. And I also think he's a great example of a guy that him walking into that X receiver gig allows Xavier Legette to no longer play that position. Because when I watched Legette as a rookie prospect, I was like, man, you know, he's not a complete player. I wouldn't have taken him in the first round. The Panthers did take him in the end of the first round. I thought he was more of a day two guy, and he would be best maximized off the line of scrimmage, kind of use not like Deebo Samuel in like the running back ways, but like get him on crossing routes and have him win after the catch because he's a big body who moves really, really well. And when the Panthers drafted him, that's kind of how they talked about him in the post-draft presser. But then when Deontay Johnson, you know, did the Deontay Johnson thing and we got to trade him and that went the way that it went, they basically threw Legette in that vacated X receiver spot, and it did not go well in the back half of his rookie year. So not only do I think McMillan brings a lot to the table from just an individual player perspective, I think he just helps some of these other receivers, young guys, especially like Jalen Coker is probably my favorite deep sleeper in the league right now, just across the NFL. He's probably more of like a power slot guy. So like what McMillan does there. And then Egbuka, I do think is closer to those guys than maybe the tier of players that you mentioned, like Burden and Higgins, just because right now, yes, he is behind two studs, right? Evans and Godwin. We know those guys are ballers, but Evans is getting a little bit older. Godwin's coming off an injury. And this is a good offensive environment. So I have tried to take the long-term view with Egbuka, who is a prospect that I just really loved. And like, we know that chaos happens, man. The depth chart right now, what it looks like might not look like that by not even just, hey, 2026, 2027. You know, we might get to October and Evans is banged up or Godwin hasn't come all the way back and Egbuka is able to outkick his redraft ADP and therefore his dynasty value will go up as well.
Yeah, I love Egbuka from a dynasty standpoint. He was one of my favorite receivers. I actually considered him the safest receiver in this class. Not the highest ceiling, but the safest receiver in this class. And it's funny because he actually reminded me a lot of Chris Godwin. You mentioned that with Mike Evans, they have out in his contract after this year, Godwin coming off injury. And this is an offense where Baker Mayfield, you know, I've talked on our show many times, like Godwin was the number one fantasy wide receiver all the way until the week before he got hurt. And at that point, Chase had just passed him by like point-something points, and then he got hurt. So we know this offense can like support a high-end fantasy receiver, and that's why I love Emeka. And going back to Tet, you know, we saw that late season surge from Bryce Young last year, where he was actually playing as like a QB1 from a fantasy football perspective with the limited weapons around him. And you're right, like when I was talking about scheme matters. Like this is an offense where they can slide Legette out, Tech can slide in and just see a ton of targets. You mentioned those quick crossing routes. Like that's where Bryce, we saw him do a lot of that in surge last year. It's something that Tet McMillan really wins at as well. So this is a person could see easily 100 plus receptions as a rookie, just by being just pummeled with the football year in and year out. And I'll take advantage of players that are in that kind of situation, right? The target hogs. Just like we love the running backs, they're in the same thing, that great situation. On my show over the years, Matt, you know, one of the all-time GOATs at running back is Alvin Kamara. And I've always said, like, you know, is Alvin Kamara the best pure runner in the league? No, but he's in a great scheme, a great system, and he fits that fantasy mold perfectly well. And now Tet McMillan kind of slides into that from a receiver standpoint where like, all right, this is a guy I could slide into my wide receiver slot and I could feel very comfortable about getting double-digit points week in and week out. Doesn't have to be the most explosive and talented receiver, but he fits this offense. He fits his quarterback, and he fits what I'm looking for from a production standpoint to a T. So those three guys, Travis Hunter, Ted McMillan, and Emeka, are like, once I miss out on those guys, I'm leaning towards tight end in this running back heavy draft. Because outside of that, and that's where I want to lean into, like, everybody knows those names, right? Everybody, I think, is on the same page when it comes to drafting receivers. They want Ted McMillan, they want Travis Hunter, and then you settle for Emeka. After that, that's where it starts to get a little bit murky, and things start to get wide open. People love Luther Burden. I don't love Luther Burden. I don't love his production that I saw at school. I don't really love some of the personality traits I saw on the field. And more importantly, I don't love how crowded that situation is over in Chicago. So he's got it, even from a talent standpoint, he's super talented, but again, the fantasy football production, like, where are we finding it? Jaden Higgins goes super high, gets a guaranteed contract in Houston, but then they draft another receiver I love in Jalen Noel as well, his former teammate, and you got Nico Collins out there, even though I love to throw the football. So how does the dynasty players like sift through what's left, which is a large basket of players? Like, who is at the top of that list for you that you see from a production standpoint can help a dynasty player kind of find that production where everybody else isn't looking this way, but you think they should be kind of, hey, instead of going left, you should go right here?
Well, one thing I'd mention too, we haven't even talked about Matthew Golden, who was also drafted in the first round. And I actually think like he obviously, to me, is in the same tier of a guy like Egbuka, just because, not from a talent perspective, I like Egbuka better as a prospect, but from a dynasty perspective, I think they're both kind of in similar situations where this is a good offensive environment. I do think that Green Bay, we have over-indexed as a fantasy community on what they were last year, like just focusing in on last year's results where they were dead last in neutral pass rate. And I think they want to be run heavy. LaFleur wants to be run heavy. That's why they got Josh Jacobs. They've always kind of been a lean on the run team, and they were a very successful team while leaning on Josh Jacobs last year. But I think 32nd, like dead last, I don't think they're going to be that throughout the course of the next few years, because I think they have more faith in Jordan Love than that. And I think we should have a little bit more faith in Jordan Love when he's healthy. That's the key variable here. Like, they came out in week 1 and were much more pass heavy than they were over the course of the season, because that was quite literally the only game that Jordan Love was fully healthy last year. He immediately got hurt in that week 1 game. He misses 2 games after that with Malik Willis under center, but then also got re-injured throughout the course of the year. So there's a chance it just might just be a more fruitful environment for fantasy receivers than we're giving it credit for. That's not to say it's not a crowded room, because just like in Tampa Bay and just like in Chicago, there's a lot of receivers here. And there's a really good tight end in Tucker Kraft. I'm still a big Jaden Reed fan. I have those guys kind of close. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Reed is the more productive guy over Matthew Golden long term, but that doesn't mean I don't want to take the shot on the fact that, like, hey, they drafted Golden for a reason. They want him to be a vertical player for their offense. I think he fits on those like deep in-breaking routes on play action really well. So I would take him before we start getting into that like Higgins Burden tier. But I think Burden is an okay bet, but he is only because, to me, I agree with a lot of your points about him being a interesting player, like from a personality perspective, but I think he really needed to be pushed. The good news is that he's going to get pushed with this coaching staff in Chicago. Like Ben Johnson, Antoine Randall, the wide receiver coach, those guys are going to push him. They're going to make him tight on the details, or he's not going to work out. Like, I just think that's the reality of the situation. So I think in the long term, like DJ Moore might not be there long term in Chicago. He's not this coach. He's not this coaching staff's guy. We'll see like how that relationship goes after a pretty sloppy year from DJ Moore, to put it kindly. I still really like Rome Odunze, and I think he's kind of different than these two. Like, he's the pure X. He's not going to leave the field. So it is sort of a competition between Burden and Moore as to who's going to be like the true second receiver long-term and who's maybe not going to work out there. But I also like, again, before you even get into players like the Houston guys, because I agree with you. Like, from a talent perspective, I prefer Jalen Noel. Draft capital obviously indicates that they like Higgins, but anything can happen there. And again, they're both competing behind an alpha receiver in Nico Collins, who I think could be the wide receiver 1 overall this year. And it wouldn't shock me, just like, again, with Higgins being an X body type, but probably somebody that you want to deploy off the line of scrimmage. he's going to take some X receiver reps, which we might actually see Nico move around the field more, which we haven't really seen to this point yet. But I would take a guy like Kyle Williams or even maybe a Jack Bech before those Houston guys, because I think they're in situations that really fit them from a talent perspective. And I did like both of those guys as day 2 prospects.
Hey guys, we are super excited to announce that we have a show that we've been doing for a few months now called Roster Rescue. It's every Monday at noon, and sometimes we even do extra shows if we have a lot of roster rescues to do. But basically what it is, it's an opportunity for us to take a look at your guys' teams, your specific team, and say, hey, I think you should go into rebuild. Hey, I think you are a contending team. Hey, trade for this guy. Hey, maybe look to make this move. We get eyes and hands on your specific team. So if you want to do that, go ahead and head to the website, go under the store tab and go down to Roster Rescue. Go there, use promo code RESCUE10 and you'll get 10% off. So head there today. It's a great opportunity for us to come rescue your rosters. All right, so I've got to ask this because after the draft was over, I felt a little bit like I must have been taking some crazy pills because there was a player that I really liked his tape. He was, I want to say, my 6th overall receiver, and he didn't even get drafted, and that was Xavier Restrepo. Loved a lot of the things I saw as far as really, really solid hands, good route runner. Obviously, the speed, the explosiveness is not there compared to a lot of the other players in the class. A guy like that, or take anybody that's round 6, 7, undrafted, guys like that. Is there anybody in this class? It doesn't have to be Restrepo. Is there anybody in this class that didn't get the love on draft weekend that we would have hoped for, but you still are holding out hope for because of whether it would be the path or situation there, the talent? Like, who are some guys like that?
Yeah, I mean, with Restrepo, 4.8. That's just that's why he falls out of the draft. It's unfortunate. And it's probably not indicative of who he is as a player, but somebody in my Discord made a perfect unsexy comparison for him. Could he just end up having an Adam Humphries type of career, which, hey, nobody's listening to this and being like, sign me up for Adam Humphries in fantasy. But hey, he had a season where he had 100 targets, over 800 yards, and got paid, ironically, by the Titans, a $9 million contract just because he had kind of 1 year like that. And I could see Restrepo popping up for a moment like that as just a solid slot receiver. So even though he's undrafted, he ends up with this college quarterback in Cam Ward, and it's an open depth chart there in Tennessee, I think, beyond Calvin Ridley. Kind of wide open there. We'll see what Tyler Lockett has left. But 2 guys I'd point out, another undrafted player, Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. I really liked what I saw from him. I thought he would be a guy that I know he'll be 25 on Halloween this year. So I get that. That's maybe why he fell out of the draft, but he led the SEC in receiving yards this year, and he had a really solid success rate versus press coverage and reception perception last year. Not like a vertical receiver, but somebody that could play X receiver, had the body type of an X, and could win on dig routes and routes over the middle of the field. And I do think there's kind of an opening for that in Miami right now. But again, long shot. He's an undrafted player. We'll see if he becomes anything. Someone I have been willing to take in rookie drafts, even though the draft capital was much less than we thought, was Tory Horton. Out of Colorado State. I know why he fell, right? It was an injury-based fall for him. But when you just watched him play, really good on crossing routes, slant route success rate was very high. I think he probably profiles as a flanker, but he tracks the ball really well and can win after the catch as well. And there's kind of, again, he's a 5th-round pick. I'm not saying he's going to come in there and start in year 1, but you look at the receivers in Seattle right now, it's a pure slot guy at this point in his career in Cooper Kupp. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who has been a slot player, but I think can play a little bit outside because he's pretty dangerous against man coverage. I'm not worried about him playing more outside in year 2, but there is kind of an opening for more of a vertical outside receiver option, and I think Horton does fit the bill. Obviously, again, 5th-round pick, it's a long shot for him to be impactful as a rookie, but somebody certainly on the 3rd day of the draft that I liked better as a talent perspective that I think fell to the Seahawks because of the injury.
Yeah, I thought Horton was a good fit there in Seattle. And Cooper Kupp, we don't even know how much longer he is for the NFL, let alone Seattle. Was that a 1-year deal he signed in Seattle as well? Was it just 1 year?
It's a glorified 1-year deal, basically. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. So yeah, it's just trying to find those paths for success, right? Do you want to lean? And again, in this class, it's a little bit difficult. I think a lot of these guys we're even talking about might be on the waiver wire of some people. It depends how deep your rookie class is, because like once you get out of these top guys, like we were talking about, this is a really deep running back class. This is a really deep tight end class from a fantasy football perspective. So it's easy to kind of like bypass these guys like it's a Scott Fishbowl, right? Like, I'm just going to go ahead and pass up all the receivers this year. The scoring doesn't just fit. So going back to the guys you talked about at the top, even like a Matthew Golden, and I like that you said you still like Jaden Reed, because I'm a Jaden Reed guy as well. Like, I hope his hands get a little stickier this year, but like when you put the ball in that guy's hands, like he is so dynamic. And you mentioned Jordan Love and his injuries. The thing that worried me last year wasn't really like his injuries, was in Green Bay is, one, they have a lot of receivers, like you mentioned. It's deep. They have Tucker Kraft, who they want to get more involved. They have Luke Musgrave, who I think is a pretty talented upside tight end as well, and those pass catcher running backs. That scheme last year, they were only targeting the receivers 48% in that offense last yeir, and they were really going after tight ends 25%. And then Josh Jacobs was heavily involved in the pass game too. I believe he saw 15% of the targets. So it's one of those few rarities where I see a first round receiver go in the NFL draft, and I'm like, oh man, I have a lot of like concerns about like drafting him and what his target share will be from a fantasy football perspective. Again, I think he fits right in and helps the Green Bay Packers instantly. Like he's a dynamic player. But from a fantasy football perspective, it's like, all right, where can I find a guy? And I love how you mentioned Kyle Williams, right? Just a really solid overall receiver, gets off the line well, runs good routes, has good hands, a clear path for opportunity, right? Like New England's like a bare cupboard over there when it comes from talent. You know, I know they bring Stephon Diggs in, and Stephon Diggs, a lot of people probably push him from the wayside, definitely from a dynasty perspective, in a redraft perspective. But Stephon Diggs was good last year when he played. When he was on the field, he was a very good receiver. And they have no weapons over there. So I do think there's a very clear path for Kyle Williams. And you mentioned a guy like Jack Bech, another receiver I really liked, a solid route runner, good hands, a little bit older. So dynasty players get wary of that. And I think right now there might be a discount on him. How would you compare Jack Bech and Deontay Thornton in Las Vegas? Because right now that's the hype, right? Like, oh, wow, Thornton's getting all the reps in OTAs, which, you know, that tells us everything we need to know.
Yeah, totally.
This is going along. How do you feel about that opportunity in Las Vegas with those two specific players, Jack Bech and Deontay Thornton? For people who haven't drafted yet and they might be on the clock, like, do I react to the news of OTAs, or do I stick to the tape and take a guy like Jack Bech in Las Vegas?
Yeah. I wouldn't worry about what happened in OTAs as like a negative for Bech, but I think it's an interesting signal for Thornton, because I remember, you know, it's always interesting when a team drafts two wide receivers. And I mean, Green Bay, they drafted two quote wide receivers, right? Because they took Savion Williams, who I don't know what the hell Savion is going to be in the NFL, weird. But I do think he actually has good catching skills. It's just the route running and like where are you going to deploy him? I don't know, but. And again, it's interesting when a team takes two receivers and like kind of looking at them. Same thing again with Houston. They took two guys really close to each other, even closer than these Raiders players. But like, what can you imagine like these guys being on the field at the same time together? I think is critical to look at. And I do think that when you look at these two Raiders players, they're so different, because like when they took Jack Bech, I thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense, because Chip Kelly has shown that he kind of wants these bigger receivers to block. And like, remember when they took Jordan Matthews with the Eagles way back in the day? Sure. And like, he was a big receiver that they like threw into the slot and was like more of a condensed tight to the line of scrimmage player. The dude literally moved to tight end at one point to closer to the NFL. Yeah. Tight end with the Panthers the last few years or whatever. So that made sense to me. And then looking at their depth charts, like, okay, they have a guy in Brock Bowers. They're probably going to play a lot of 12 personnel. Michael Mayer is going to be on the field there too. Is that a little redundant? Because you know what they really need is like a vertical lid lifter. And theoretically, that is what Thornton should be, right? He's a big, freaky receiver, but he comes from this kind of Looney Tunes college offense where he's just pure boundary stuff, like goes and curls. Like, I thought he'd be more of a developmental player, but theoretically is exactly what they need. So I do think from a Thornton perspective, the signal that, hey, they're putting him on the field and they're saying like, nah, don't worry, like there's a lot more to him than you think. That might be good news for him long-term, that he could earn a role down the line. Now, I don't think he's going to outproduce Bech as a rookie or anything like that, but again, when you just look at this Raiders offense where they kind of have a slot heavy player in Jacoby Myers. Now, Myers only played in the slot 33% of the time last year, and he's been over 70% success rate versus man coverage in multiple seasons as a pro player. Like, he's not just a slot only guy. Bech, I think, can also play a little bit outside, but probably projects as kind of more a hefty power slot player. And then they have these two tight ends. Trey Tucker is not going to be that like big outside lid lifter. Thornton maybe could be in time.
I can see Thornton kind of being like an old school, like Will Fuller, early Deshaun Jackson, 3 catches, 97 yards and a touchdown.
That would be a hell of an outcome for a 4th round pick, but like stylistically, yeah, that's exactly the type of player he should be.
And we got to remember, Brock Bowers is a true number 1 target in Las Vegas. He's going to be fed all the targets.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us, talking these rookie wide receivers. We love hearing your analysis on reception perception. Real quick, what are you guys working on over there? What are you doing? And how can people get plugged in with that?
Yeah, all of the rookie content, if people want to dive in more, receptionperception.com, full profiles on all these guys. My Dynasty ranks are up to date over there as well. Right now, working on actually more of the veteran players. So just dropped the year 4 receiver profiles, guys that are going to their 4th year. That very, very, I would say, unlucky 2022 draft class. Like the circumstances that guys like Garrett Wilson and Drake London and even like George Pickens have played in over the course of their career, not been very good. So those are all up to date. And then I'm working on kind of the more like high tier guys like Nico Collins, who I mentioned a lot. His profile will be up in our next drop that should be coming up at the end of the month.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Stay locked in here to the YouTube page. We're bringing on even more content creators. We're bringing more content than we ever have before. So stay locked in, and we'll see you next time.